Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. I hope and trust that you are all well. Before I get started, I would like to give a very special shout out to the reformed members of Back to Ashes. Thorough Scrutiny, Samantha Place, Lisa Radford, Tina Mead, Stephanie McLaren, Corpse Lover, Manna Ash, Normie D.W., Chrissy Elias, Cindy Cleveland, and Patty's niece. If you would like to become a member of Back to Ashes, that information can be found in the description below. Also, thank you for those that have donated to my GoFundMe. I am still accepting donations as I'm still looking for a place to go. If you would like the information on why I'm using a GoFundMe, it can be found on the Community tab. And if you feel the need to donate, that link is also in the description below. Now, with all of that being said, it is time to go back to ashes. For once we arise from the ashes, we are a bigger, brighter, stronger, and happier person in the morning. Sit back, relax, kick back, grab a snack, or tuck in and get warm, and prepare for this dose of vocal melatonin entitled Middle of Nowhere Scary Stories. Right after this intro and ad will play, I'll read the first story an ad will play, and after that, there will be no more ads within this video. I'm not a hunter, but I was hiking in a state park with a friend once about half a mile away from the trail, and 5 miles from the trail's start. And we found a woman's blouse, some jeans that were ripped from the zipper to the crotch, and a pair of underwear. It all looked super dirty, like it had been there for a really long time. It really freaked me out, especially because it wasn't the type of clothes you would wear for a couple-mile hike. We reported it to the ranger station, and they said they would check it out, but I don't know if they ever did. When I got home, I looked for any crimes in that area for the past couple years, but I couldn't find anything. I haven't been in those woods without a group since then. Not in the night, but when I was a teenager, my friends and I liked to explore uninhabited islands. They're called the Thousand Islands in the Indian River Lagoon. We camped, played paintball, and had just pretty much innocent fun. One day, we decided to explore a new island for a fresh spot. We found a big one, so to save time, I was inserted on the southern end to explore while the others canoed around the island to see what there was to see. The plan was for me to meet them on the north side. That did not happen. The island was hell. Brambles, bush so thick I had to belly crawl through muck. The perimeter was a swamp with dead trees and God knows what's lurking under that film of green algae. And then there were the skeletons. As I crawled my way up the island, I came upon skeleton after skeleton. Turtles, raccoons, deer. That's when it hit me. This is an alligator haven. I freaked out and made a break for the open water, not wanting to die. I yelled out as loud as I could, and fortunately, my friends heard me and paddled furiously out to me. I had made it only 1/3 of the way up the island and was thankfully extracted. We named that one Hell Island, and we never returned. In 2014, I was driving at night on Highway 81 in southwest Oklahoma. It was around 2 a.m., and I hadn't seen another car for at least 30 minutes. I was on a stretch of road between Chickasha and Rush Springs. In other words, I was in the middle of nowhere. I come over a small rise and see a car upside down in the ditch and a body laying just outside of the car. Kind of looked like he was sleeping on his side. I slam on the brakes and get out of my car and run over to the guy. I touch his shoulder and he kind of slumped over onto his back. It was then I could see his head was smashed flat on the left side and his abdomen was open. I could smell whiskey coming out of his gut. It was horrifying. This man had no pulse, so I get my phone out and call 911. I give them an estimate of where I am. They tell me the nearest help is 25 minutes away, and I needed to wait with the wreck until they got there. Well, shit. I hang up the phone and look around. I'm alone in bumfuck, Oklahoma, the only companion to a dead man, not knowing what to really do. I took his hand and said the Lord's Prayer, then covered his face with a shirt that was hanging out of the car. I seriously was shaking all over. It was then I heard the coyotes start tuning up. If you haven't heard this sound, it's akin to small children being hurt badly. They wail and screech in what I think is a big circle around me and this man. It's been 15 minutes and no other cars have shown up. I hear them on the highway. They are crossing just out of the headlights of my car. Now I have a decision. Do I get in the car and let them come up and tear on this guy, or do I find something to swing and protect his body? I chose the latter. I got the tire iron out of my trunk and go back over to where he's laying. I guess I'm making a stand. I wait another 5 minutes. I hear them running around. It's really dark. I realize I am not truly in control of this situation. Something very primal comes over my brain. It's akin to rage, along with a heavy dose of fear. Whatever was going to happen, I was going to fight like a crazed ape on the savannah. At this very moment, I see car lights. Finally, a car shows up, and wouldn't you know, it's a Pontiac Grand Am full of methed up country boys. They pull over and look me over, then see the dead man, then the car. I say, "Guys, the guy is dead, and there are coyotes circling me." They go to their car and pull out several handguns and a couple of flashlights. They are wired for sound and excited as hell to kill the shit out of these things. Although they were almost as unnerving as the wild animals out in the dark. A couple of minutes pass and we hear a siren off in the distance. The guys say, "It's the cops!" They jump in their car and haul ass. I'm alone again. Me and this poor man. 60 seconds later, a state trooper shows up, then 2 deputy sheriffs, and finally, 3 city cops from some small town called Ninska, I think is how you say it, and finally, an ambulance. They look the guy over and pronounce him dead. They then ask me 1,000 questions, finally asking if they could search my car for drugs. I'm sober and have been for the past 7 years. They search and find nothing, then tell me, "Thanks for staying with the wreck. You can go now." So I left and start driving down this pitch dark road yet again. I feel like I've been in a battle for my life, and thinking our civilized behavior is little more than a thin veneer over a wild animal that wants to survive. For the folks with the stories from nights in the woods, I have one that ultimately ended in a logical explanation, I think, in case you do not want to read further. Last October, I was in California for 11 days after my brother's wedding in San Diego. Just wanted to drive around the state and visit California, places that had captured my imagination over the years. And I love driving almost as much as I love cars. Some destinations, the Pacific Coast Highway, San Francisco, Bodega Bay, where parts of Hitchcock's The Birds was filmed. That movie scared the hell out of my now deceased mother. I also wanted to visit Clipper Mills, California, where the longest audio of Bigfoot was captured one night in 2012. I don't necessarily believe in Sasquatch, but would never discount someone else's experience, especially if I wasn't there. So off I went. Clipper Mills is in the foothills of the Sierra Nevadas, about 70 miles northeast of Sacramento, very near that dam that was in danger of falling last year. Pretty remote. So after Bodega Bay, I head across the state for my destination, arriving near Sacramento, in time for a late dinner. So it's after dark when I set out on the final leg. And I do mean very dark. It takes me a good while on all the twisty turning roads to find my way there. I wanted to get the exact spot the person who posted the video parked that night. He wouldn't say it in his videos, so I poked around YouTube and the comment sections and related videos and found more or less the spot. Around 11 p.m., I pulled my rented Camry well off the dark 2-lane road to avoid any issues with the very sparse traffic. I saw none whatsoever as I sat in the darkened interior, listening, allowing my eyes to dark adapt for about 20 minutes. I heard nothing but assorted insects as I sat there. Saw nothing moving at all. Eventually, not wanting to activate the car's interior lighting, I crawled out the driver's side window into the black night. Armed with my cell phone, no service of course, a handheld GPS to find my way back should I get lost in the dark, and the red flashlight I use with my telescope. I stand there right by that car window for a solid 2 minutes before I could screw up the courage to move away from the Camry. Eventually, I walk up the road, still not hearing anything but bugs. Suddenly, without conscious decision to do so, I veer right and head up into the woods. My feet are crunching pine needles now, and to my mind, I sound like Bigfoot stomping around myself. After what was about 20 minutes, I stop to listen and added to the insects. I hear this faint screeching sound far off in the blackness that doesn't sound insect-like at all. It has more consciousness. The now also thoroughly dark adapted mind is whispering that it sounds like a person in distress or a very large primate. I remain still. I hear something small scurrying around in the underbrush as well, followed a minute later by that same forlorn-sounding wail, now closer. Time to return to the car. As I'm walking back to the car, I hope, I hear this spooky sound every 20 to 30 seconds, and now it is coming from behind me and in front of me. Shit. It seems I have a vocabulary of some sort to me now. Different vocalizations, some guttural, some high-pitched, and everywhere in between. My mind is having fun, just messing with me now. I was never so happy to see a Camry in all my life. I started it up before my ass was in the seat, I think, and half expected to see scores of red eyeballs glowing at me in the headlights from the dark forest. Now spooked in my mind telling me some homicidal, axe-wielding lunatic was nipping at my heels. I went back the way I came at a much quicker pace than I had arrived. Out of nowhere, right in front of me, this black lab runs out of the woods on one side of the road and into the woods on the other. I had just barely missed crushing him. That scared the ever-living shit out of me right there. I slowed down a bit, the thought of nearly mowing down an innocent mutt overcoming my mind. Some hour down the road toward Sacramento, when I noticed I had cell service again, I opened my Expedia app and found a nearby hotel for the night. Once safely ensconced in said hotel room, I began scouring the internet on my iPad and came to the conclusion that what I'd heard was a barred owl or western screech owl. Can never be 100% sure, I suppose. Very creepy though. I'm done with wandering alone in the woods, in the middle of nowhere, at night, I think. This is a true story and happened almost a year ago. I was driving across the country with my friend. At this juncture, we were in North Dakota. It had been a long day, lots of driving. At this point, it was 1 a.m. I just woke up from a nap. My back was killing me. Hey man, let's call it a night. My back is killing me. Let's go get a hotel. All right, we'll get off on the next exit. So we're driving. There's nothing around us. Abso-freaking-lutely nothing. Middle of nowhere nothing. Eventually, we get to the next exit, and after a little driving, we spot a hotel. There's some road construction going on around it, and some of the roads are closed. We try driving up to it, but every intuitive path is fenced off. Now the hotel was more or less right in front of us. To our right, there was kind of a dirt or gravel road that went into a thicket of trees. About 500 yards down this road, there was a bright light. This road is the complete opposite direction of the hotel and the main road. Remember, there's nothing around but this one hotel and infinity fields and trees. It's also like 1:30 a.m. and it's completely pitch black. We keep driving around, unable to get to the hotel, when my friend just drives towards the light on the dirt road, which is barely wider than the car. I constantly get a bad feeling. This makes no sense. Why is there a light at the end of this dark dirt road? Dude, what are you doing? This is like bugs flying to a light. Turn around. I will once I find a spot. I don't exactly have the space. Okay, that did make sense. The road was narrow and kind of dropped off on each side. He kept driving closer to the light, which I thought may have been a generator light for construction. Dude, this doesn't make any sense. We get closer, and it's a huge flatbed truck with its high beams on. As we realize this, we're also blinded by the brightness of them. Shit, I thought. These people have us where they want us. I'm shielding my eyes, and my buddy is driving slowly to pass the behemoth of a truck when the blinding light of the high beams is interrupted by someone walking in front of them, and then to our car. My friend hits the brakes. The figure walks up. My friend rolls the window down a little. It's a well-dressed guy. My friend says, oh, hey, we're just trying to get to that hotel over there, but there's all that construction. Oh, yeah, that hotel's the greatest. Just follow us and we'll get you there. Okay, great, thanks. The interaction was pleasant enough. My friend rolls up the window and drives past the truck. As he's driving past, the window not all the way up yet, the guy outside calls to another guy. Get in the truck. I see some guy from the shadows toss a cig and walk up to the passenger side of the truck. We have to get the hell out of here, like right now. I know, man, I'm working on it. Hang on. At this point, we're doing a 15-point turn on this dark road in the middle of nowhere, literally. We get turned around and the truck is driving slowly and in the middle of the road, intentionally taking up the whole path. I'm bumbling on about how this makes no sense and we need to escape when all of a sudden the truck slams on its brakes and both guys simultaneously jump out and start running towards us. The guy on my side had a shotgun. My friend didn't miss a beat and just floored it, and we went flying off the little drop-off on the side of the road. We sped all the way back to the road, got back on the highway, making sure we weren't followed, and we went to the next town. Sleep was not that good that night. It was 2001, and my friend and I were 17. We're both female, by the way, and driving back from a late-night movie to my house one night. I lived in a pretty rural area in Maine, about 20 minutes from the nearest town. As we were driving down the highway through the woods, we passed a median with a car sitting in it, facing in the oncoming direction, with all of its lights off. Right after we drove past it, it flashed its lights, did a 3-point turn, and started driving behind us. We giggled that, oh, it must be a gang initiation. We're gonna get murdered. Because this was Maine, and that was obviously not what was happening. The turnoff for my road was a few miles away, and this car stayed behind us the entire time. We made the left turn, and the car kept going down the highway. Phew. But 30 seconds later, we realized that the car must have backed up on the highway and made the turn after us. Now we were getting a little worried. There was still one more road to turn down before we got to my house. This is way in the woods, by the way. And the car did the same thing, backed up and made the left after us. Now we were legit freaked. I had a long driveway, and the car followed us right into the driveway and almost up to my house, which had all the lights on because my mom was home. We ran into the house just in time to see the mystery car reverse back down the driveway and drive away. To this day, we still have no idea why that car was following us. If they thought we were someone else, or if they actually had bad intentions and only changed their mind when they saw that my house lights were on. Since we only ever saw the front of the car, we didn't get a license plate, unfortunately, or a better description than a blue car. Since that night, I am now more conscious about my surroundings, even driving at night. My friends and I were high in the woods deep in the Sierra Nevadas in the California backcountry and decided to travel a few miles off a path to reach a river and shoot at targets with our .22. The path is littered with deer bones and claw marks from bears, so we're freaking out a bit, but finally make it to where we set up camp. I noticed off in the distance, about a half a mile upstream, the river, there are two men walking towards us in the exact same direction we are firing our gun. I yell at the guys for them to stop shooting, and we just watch these men, wide-eyed and in their late 20s or early 30s, walking quickly alongside the river, when suddenly they both decide to jump in. I should say at this point that the river is moving very quickly and could easily sweep you under and is definitely not safe for a casual swim. We watch as both of the men are swept away towards us downstream. One of my friends, we'll call him Mike, decides to be brave and get close to the edge and extend a piece of wood for them to grab as they're about to pass us. Both of the men latch on, and Mike is the hero, pulling them to shore. When everyone catches their breath, we ask them what they were doing out here, as it's super remote and they were at least 3 or 4 miles from the nearest trail, and why they both jumped in the deadly river. They gave us short answers like, "Oh, we were just having fun, you know us boys," and "just free swimming the river," while they're leering at us. Immediately, the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and every fiber in my body tells me they mean us harm. We tell them we're going to head back to the trail, and they say they're coming with us. Given that we're so far off from civilization, and these guys are clearly high on something and a danger to themselves, we reluctantly agreed to allow them to follow us. It was the most quiet hike of my life. I felt them trying to fill out if they could take us in a fight. There were 3 of us and 2 of them, and we had a .22, but we're young, squirrely adults. I don't know how to explain it, but the hike was us constantly positioning against each other with body language without ever directly fighting. They would get close to the gun and try to be both near it. Then we would counter by getting between them and the gun as naturally as possible, while hiking up a path that was littered in bear claw marks and dung. We finally make it to the car, and they decide we weren't suitable targets and moved on. No idea what 2 random guys were doing risking their life in a freezing cold raging river in the Sierra Nevadas, or why they felt the need to size up if they could attack 3 random teens, but I'm glad nothing happened that day. Since then, we make sure to map out exactly where we're going and always carry a phone on us. Before I get started, please excuse my icky English. I am no native speaker. I'm from Germany. When I was 20, I used to work as a pizza delivery guy in a small city in northern Germany. On my way home, I had to drive a few miles on a remote street that led through forest and farmland. One night, it must have been around 1 a.m., there was a huge thunderstorm, and I had to drive slowly and very carefully. When I came to a road junction, I noticed a figure standing in the middle of the road. It looked like a tall and slender man in a long black leather cloak with a hood. At first, I thought it was someone who had an accident and was looking for help. But when my headlights hit the figure, I noticed that the cloak, especially the hood, appeared to be empty. Also, my headlights did not illuminate the cloak like they should have. It was just the lighting reflecting on the smooth, wet surface that allowed me to see the shape. Of course, I floored the gas pedal and went as fast as I dared. A couple of miles later, I ran into the same, or at least a very similar, figure, again standing right in the middle of the road and not moving at all. This time, I didn't even slow down and rushed right past it. It scared the shit out of me. A couple of weeks later, this time no thunderstorm, just a beautiful warm summer night, I encountered another creature right where I saw the black figure before. It looked like a giant deer, but without fur and pale gray whitish skin. It was extremely skinny, almost skeletal-like, and had an abnormally long and thin tail. It ran alongside the road and kept pace with me quite easily as I drove past it. Only when I slammed the gas pedal and went suicidally fast, it started to fall behind and eventually disappeared into a crop field. The very next day, I quit my job and never used that road at night ever again. Although it's not really work, I do go hunting kinda north in Canada. And the thing is, where I hunt for deer, there are plenty of wolves, bears, and sorts. So I stay in a cabin up there. You aren't always on your toes, but you want to bring a rifle with you to go anywhere, even if you don't plan on shooting anything. So, it's like 5 a.m., and I'm on the four-wheeler. I'm freezing in this weather to get to my tree stand before dawn hits, and I swear to God, I keep hearing crashing through the bushes. I dismiss it for probably being ice crackling from branches from last night's snow, but creepy nonetheless. As I reach my stand, I climb up and settle for the morning. I get a pretty nice view of a field that was cleared out, and there is an old burned-out cottage on the opposite end of the clearing. As the sun rises behind my stand, the morning is very still, just the occasional branch falling down through the forest. Day really passed without any ammo being spent, and I get out of my tree stand. I decide maybe I should go look at the burned-down cabin. I've never bothered checking it, and looking at it all day got me curious enough to go and want to check it out. There wasn't a cleared trail, obviously, so I'd have to go at it on foot. I unloaded my rifle and went for a long walk. Around a good 10 minutes later, I started to get close and could see some old farm equipment, which made sense. A field in the middle of the forest was probably cleared so a farmer could do what he wants with it. I come close to the doorway, only really able to hear the crunch of snow beneath my feet. The doorway managed to survive whatever happened there and slid down the snow in through the doorway, careful not to touch anything. I feel crunching under my boots that definitely isn't snow. It's the skull of a bull. I look up from the snow and there is more of them, skulls and legs, a ridiculous amount. But the part that alarmed me is that I could see a tint of red in the snow underneath one that was still covered in skin. So I said to hell with that and bolted back across the field and didn't look back. Why was someone collecting that shit in the middle of the forest? I don't have a clue, and I don't want to think about it. Next year, I moved my stand, and I never ever want to go back there. Weird shit happens in the forest. I used to work for a pest control company and did most of the termite pre-treatment work. This typically involved working super late into the night to get the work done before concrete crews get started in the morning. I was on a job site for a big custom house way out in the desert in the middle of nowhere. The entire job site was surrounded with high barbed wire fence with a drive-through gate. I was down in a dugout area for a basement with my truck working away when I heard the fence line rattle. I was wearing a hat-mounted flashlight, so I looked up and scanned the fence line, thinking a coyote was walking along it. Instead, I found a woman trying to climb the fence, but unable to get past the barbed wire portion. I have heard of people say crazed look before, but never understood the statement before this moment. As soon as my flashlight hit her, she dropped back to the ground and just stood there looking at me. A lot of the night is weirdly lost in my memory, either because it was over a decade ago or because fear made me foggy, but I do remember a few things very, very vividly. Her eyes were as wide open as they could get, like almost popping out of their sockets. She kept muttering to herself, but I couldn't hear what she was saying. And when she wasn't talking, she kept kind of smiling like her face muscles were trying to pull her mouth open. All she was wearing was a super dirty and torn up long shirt or dress, and she had no shoes on. She kept walking back and forth along that fence line, and I was pretty sure she was looking for a way in. I always lock myself in construction sites when working, and thankfully I did that night too. It felt like it took me forever to get my equipment stowed and the pistol out of my truck cab, all while trying to keep an eye on this crazy woman. She just kept staring at me, muttering, and pacing the fence line. I was able to reach the police, but it took almost 40 minutes for a sheriff's officer to get out to me because we are in the middle of nowhere. As soon as his car starts making noise on the dirt road leading to the work site, the lady ran off into the desert. I'm sure she was drugged out of her head or something, but I still don't know how she got that far out of town in the dark and with no shoes on. I was a good 30 minutes or more out of town driving, much less afoot. I still have an occasional nightmare about it, and it always ends up with me forgetting I left the gate open and panic running back to the truck. I went on a little hiking trip with my dad in Shasta, California, a small town in northern California near the Oregon border. Shasta is home to potentially active volcanoes named, of course, Mount Shasta. There are many trails on Mount Shasta, so my father and I were excited to do some hiking. We drove up the side of the mountain to the parking lot in which one of the trails begins. I believe it was called the Old Ski Bowl Trail. The landscape was a very barren incline, filled with rocks and boulders, dirt, and very few trees. About an hour into the trail, we came across a very odd assembly of these large boulders. They were arranged in a circle. We thought it was strange, but we continued on. If you look up pictures of the trail, you'll see much smaller rocks arranged in patterns and circles. My father and I only encountered 3 people. At least that's what they appeared to be at first. The first 2 were a father and son. We met them on a steep incline that went along the wall of a cliff that would then switch back as it reached the top of the cliff. We stopped and said hello, talked about the trail, and then went on our merry way. Here's where it gets weird. Dad and I kept walking up the incline for about 2 minutes. I turned around and I saw the father and son so far down the trail. It should have taken them at least 20 minutes to get down to where they were, but somehow they made it in about only 2 minutes. To this day, I have absolutely no idea how they could have done that. There was no one else on the trail at that point, and I could see the color of their clothes from that distance, so I knew it was them. I pointed it out to my dad. We thought it was weird, but we didn't dwell on it, so we kept going. And here is where it gets much weirder. As we reached the top of the cliff, there was another strange rock arrangement that was off to the side of the trail. This time, they were far more rocks than before, and they were now arranged in rows, almost like gravestones. We continued on the trail and reached another sort of incline with a switchback to reach the top of another cliff. We reached a point where we would need climbing gear to continue, so we decided to head back. When we turned around, I saw a man standing among the tracks, staring at us. He was wearing a button-up shirt, cargo shorts, and a wide-brimmed straw hat. He was at a distance where I should have been able to make out his facial features, but it was almost as if he had none. Like his face was just flesh and skin. I pointed out to my dad, and then the man quickly ducked down behind a boulder and was peering out at us over the top of the boulder. It seemed almost playful, like a child trying to hide. For a few moments, I was out of it, and I had no recollection of what was going on. According to my dad, I just started walking towards the man in the hat. My dad was calling to me, "Joshua, Josh, what are you doing? Where are you going?" And then I came to. I was standing right at the edge of a cliff. It was a huge drop, enough to kill me or seriously injure me. My dad grabbed me and pulled me back to the trail. He told me to stay put, and my dad went down to the boulders to search for the man, but he wasn't there. There was nowhere for him to go except up or down the trail. It didn't make any sense. He just disappeared. I have no idea what was going on that trail that day, and I have no explanation for it. I've told this many times to family and friends that no one has an explanation. I've done research and found similar stories about encounters with a man with no facial features, wearing a hat. I've also read that the Native American tribes from the area viewed Mount Shasta as a holy site. They believe it could act as a portal to another dimension, and that it was guarded by spirits who would potentially harm anyone who tried to go up the volcano. If anybody has any similar experiences or any insight at all, I would love to hear it. So please share anything you have to offer. I used to own a horse boarding and training farm with about 45 acres surrounded by woods. I used to spend the night there quite a bit because I had to start chores early in the morning, so if I stayed too late, it wasn't worth it to drive home. One night, at about midnight, my dog started to bristle up and growl at the door of the office I slept in, and then my iPod, which I kept on a speaker in the middle of the barn, started blasting out Johnny Cash's Ring of Fire at full volume, which I definitely hadn't left it on. Let me tell you, that song is freaky as shit in the middle of the night, middle of nowhere, like shit your pants freaky. My dog was full on growling and barking at the door, so I cracked it and let him run out, figuring that if someone were in or around the barn, he'd get them. Anyone there would have been trespassing at that time of night. After a few minutes, I went out of the office into the barn aisle, with a bat of course, to turn off the creepy-ass music. The light I usually kept on so I could see around was off, so it was pitch black in most of the barn. My dog was just staring out the barn door, which I kept open in the summer to keep the horses cooler, with his hair bristled but wasn't leaving the barn, which he was always allowed to do. I wrote it off as creepy as hell, but I ultimately just said one of these things, like it's weird and I can't explain it. But there's got to be an explanation. I'm just not privy to it. But the real scary part is that my property shared a private gate in the back with the property closest to mine, which had a gate at the back. Most of my property was fenced because of the horses, and the property next to mine was like dozens of acres fenced with a chain link fence, which, if you know anything about rural fencing, is not done. Anyways, we found out later that the owner of the adjoining property was Todd Collop, the South Carolina serial killer. He had a woman chained up like a dog on his property, who he and his friends would sexually assault and walk around the property on a leash. He also had some bodies of people he killed buried on his property. He was doing a lot of stuff while I lived next to him. In fact, I used to ride on his property, but would always turn around if I heard machinery. In retrospect, probably burying bodies. Or got the creeps. Like something would tell me to turn around and go home. I was probably one of the few, if not only, persons besides his friends who were sexually assaulting the woman to go on his property while all of that went on. Don't get me wrong, I love living out here, but with him next door, I'm really considering moving. I used to work as a housekeeper for this company that would assign me to different houses in the area that were hiring. I had this one job at a house that was just a few towns over one night. I was reluctant to go since it was late, but I knew an old back road that would cut the driving time in half. It used to be an old logging road, and there's tons of them here in Oregon that can be handy shortcuts to places. One downside was the road was very small, windy, and if you got into a crash, you'd basically be in the middle of nowhere surrounded by forest. I'm not sure it was completely legal to drive on either. So anyways, I was driving down this road, groggy and tired, when I felt a small collision on my trunk. I cursed and pulled over to inspect the damage and talk to the driver, who had seemingly come out of nowhere. He pulled up behind me. I got out and walked over to him and asked if he was okay. I was about 3 feet from the car, and I could see him sitting in there, but he wasn't getting out. It was winter and night, so everything was pitch black and I could barely see anything, but I knew there was a figure in that car. It was freezing cold and I was getting creeped out, so I told him since there was barely any damage, I was just gonna go. As I'm heading back to my car, I heard his door open behind me. I turned around and saw him standing there. He was tall and had on a large black coat and baggy jeans. I stepped towards him and noticed something that made my heart sink. His hands were white-skinned, but his face looked dark. I squinted and realized he was wearing black makeup on his face. This scared me even more because I was thinking he was wearing blackface. And for the record, I am black. And he had followed me out here in the middle of nowhere to harm me. I turned and started for my car when all of a sudden I felt the cold tip of the gun press against the back of my head. I was ready to cry at this point, thinking I was going to die alone out here because of my skin color. I ended up trying to reason with him, but I could barely choke out my words, as I told him he didn't have to do this. Something surprising happened. The guy started to cry as well, and just like that, he jumped in his car and sped off. Maybe I should have tried to see the license plate, but At that moment, I just got in my car, drove home, and called my parents. I never, ever in my entire life thought I'd narrowly escape from being the victim of what was possibly a hate crime, especially in the middle of nowhere. I'm glad this guy had a change of heart, or whatever you want to call his reasoning for sparing me. This happened 12 years ago when I was 16, and I'm a female. Back then, I lived in a small town where most people lived out in the country. Around 12 a.m. on a Saturday, I'm dropping my friend off after a night of hanging out. This friend lived way out in the country, and to get there, you had to take a lot of winding roads with nothing on either side, and not very many people traveled on them. There were a few houses, but most of them own a lot of land, so they were majorly spread out. I always hated dropping her off at night because driving back was always super creepy. Probably because I have seen way too many horror movies to know what can happen out in the middle of nowhere. But it was my turn to drive that night. After dropping her off, I'm being super careful, not only because of my irrational fear, but because of drunks who don't take the curves well. I turn left on the last small street before I get to the main road, and this street has two major curves that you have to take slow since they were pretty wide and almost back to back. I'm coming up on the first curve, so I'm slowing down when I see three people dressed in all black, black sweatpants and black pants, walking and blocking the entire lane. It was frustrating at first because I thought they were just teenagers not thinking of the dangers of what they were doing. So I sped up to hurry and pass them in the other lane before a car coming the other direction hit me. As I'm passing them, I look out my side window to see a glimpse of the idiot teenagers' faces. When I notice all three of them are wearing the same creepy gray skull mask, and they all stared at me as I passed them. If it was close to Halloween, I would have passed it off as someone getting in the spirit of Halloween, you know? But it was not. This happened in May. The weird thing about the situation was it didn't seem like they were trying to run me off the road or cause me harm. They didn't even look behind them when I first pulled up on them. The whole situation was too weird, so I called the police. They called me back pretty soon after and told me they sent someone to the exact location where I described and said they found nobody walking on the street or even on the side of it. What creeped me out about that is that there's nowhere the three people could have hid because this street had open land on both sides. There were also no side streets that they could have turned on to evade the cops. They had to have been picked up by somebody or knew of a good place to hide. Either way, I know what I saw were actual people and not something I made up. I have no idea to this day what those three people were up to. But I told my friend that if she wanted me to drop her off again, it needed to be before dark because I never wanted to find out what their intentions were. This is one of my favorite stories to tell. Describes my childhood and fits this genre, so I decided to share. It was 2009. I'm in high school and I'm male. English is not my first language, so feel free to give me a writing lesson. I live in an island where most people live near the coast, but my childhood house is deep in the mountains. Imagine a house in the woods, but at the very top of a mountain. The house is surrounded by thick mist every night, like in the bad horror movies, and the woods around it start less than 2 feet from the outer walls of the house. Our closest neighbor is about a 15-minute drive, and 5 minutes away, there's an abandoned house. I think the house belonged to a distant relative, but was abandoned more than 40 years ago. There's no street lights, and there's all kinds of animals roaming the area. This is important to the story because even though you couldn't see a group of 10 people hiding 1 meter away from you in the woods, you could hear absolutely everything up to a couple kilometers away. If we saw our car lights or heard a car approaching, me and my family would turn off the lights and hide. Don't know why, shy, antisocial, you name it. I think that's enough to set the story up, but I'll add some details that might be important. My house is small and impoverished, but our family car was a good one. I don't know much about cars, but my dad always said that without a really good car, we wouldn't be able to go up and down the mountain we lived in. Also, there's currently 8 people inside our house at around 11 p.m. So I'm at the dining table enjoying some cereal while I watch some anime, having the time of my life. The lights in the house were on, so nothing could be seen in the dark outside. There's a window in front of me that gives to the front entrance of the house and the only road. Something calls my attention, but I don't hear or see anything. I think I see a human silhouette outside, but it's not moving. So I just ignore it as some effect of the lights in the house and my own reflection. More anime, more cereal. I feel something moving at the other side of the window, and this time the silhouette is waving at me. I felt my heart jump out of my chest and froze. The person outside waves at me as if trying for nobody else in the house to notice him. After maybe 10 seconds in which I'm just looking at him with a spoon halfway to my mouth, he decides to call. "Hello? I need help." My parents hear him and approach the window, which made me sure I wasn't looking at a ghost. Amazing news. The man outside starts telling a story about how he got his car stolen at gunpoint and needs help. My parents are surprised that nobody heard his footsteps or a car or anything, so they whisper their theories amongst themselves. For the mystery guy's story to be true, he had to have been mugged more than a mile away, got his car stolen, and then walk for half an hour in the dark through the woods following the dim light of our house. My parents still decide to believe him, and they offer calling the police. Our visitor begs to say the stupidest thing he could have. No, don't call the police. I don't have a gun." My parents stay silent for a while. The guy outside knows he messed up, but proceeds to make his request. Can I get a ride downtown?" My dad nervously chuckles and gives him an excuse. He mentions, this time, the fact that he felt like the guy was lying and that he had already called the police, which was a lie. This is when my favorite part of the story begins. I stand up from the table, shaking. I go to a closet, and even though I can't see the guy's face, I know he's following my actions. I get 2 machetes that are half my size and run to another room. I was terrified, and looking back, I probably took away the only weapons my parents could have used to protect themselves in case of an altercation. I opened a door to the room where me and my siblings sleep, and they were watching some silly show. Probably something stupid like Hannah Montana or iCarly. And their hyena laughter came out. My sisters are loud, and my younger brothers are around 4 and 7 and 9 years old, so their laughs are angelical by day and demonic by night. I signal at them to shut up, and they do so, joining me and my parents in our fear. We hear in silence as the guy says, "It's okay if you can't help me. I'll just go to the next house." Then my dad said, "There's no next house. You should wait here for the police." And then the stranger says, I don't need the police. I'm good." This goes back and forth. The guy is now in good shape to walk an hour down the mountain to reach downtown. My dad offers a rusty metal tricycle from our porch so that he can go downtown as a joke. The guy accepts this offer and grabs the tricycle. I assume he just wanted to leave with something. This tricycle is 20 years old, and it definitely doesn't work. We hear the screeching of the tricycle for a couple seconds as the stranger struggled to be able to ride it, and then it stopped, not too far away from our house. It seems like he stopped, and we didn't hear any footsteps that indicated the guy had left. After trying to identify if he was still on site to no avail, my dad calls the police. We wait in silence, looking at the road from the front windows. 15 minutes later, the police get there. Amazing time back home, heroic even. And as soon as the red and blue lights show up, they illuminate the entire road up to the abandoned house. The tricycle is still in the road not too far away. The police claim not seeing anybody on the road. Only one road in the mountain. If the guy kept on walking, they would have seen him. So they just took a look at the woods with a flashlight and called it a day. The cops were clearly freaked out by the eerie look of our house and did not stay more than 5 minutes. Nothing else happened that night. I slept with 2 machetes under my pillow, which I remember angered one of my sisters. I have no idea who this person was. No carjackings were reported the next day, and even though a lot of weird shit happens around my house, we never saw this guy again. It's pretty obvious he was trying to steal our family car, but there were a few things we could never understand. Where the hell did he come from? Where the hell did he go? If his story were true, he had the worst luck in the world. I think the situation was interesting because I think about his point of view, and our horror night turns a bit comical. I mean, imagine this. You go rob a house. Turns out the people inside speak calmly. I don't know how much criminals encounter this as they try to intimidate or deceive people. I don't know. There's a scrawny, seemingly mute kid that tries to be sneaky in grabbing some machetes and then hide in the darkness in the house. And there's child's laughter coming from the non-visible rooms from the house. He could see the doors, but the inside of the rooms would be geometrically impossible to look into from the windows. I think we were lucky to out-creep the creep that night. I don't see any other reason for the guy to come back out from his plans. This guy clearly had a gun and bad intentions. Not to mention his ability to ninja walk through a forest where we even hear wildcats walking around. Also, no neighbors to witness or near anything. To this day, I wonder what's happened to that man, and as night falls every night, I'm constantly looking at my windows, making sure he's not looking back. And that, dear listeners, brings a close to these true middle-of-nowhere horror stories. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you kindly. If you are awake, I hope you've enjoyed this collection. Until next time, please take care of yourselves. I'll be reading to you soon. Have yourself a good morning, a good afternoon, or good night. Peace, love, and light.